So today, in this talk, I want to speak to you about karma and its relationship to forgiveness. There are many concepts like this in different spiritual traditions. So it's been called karma, vasanas, impurities in the mind. I prefer to simply call it conditioning. It's a simple word, much easier to understand by a Western contemporary mind. Karma is also a scary word because we used to view karma in a very simplistic, incorrect way. As some sort of a punishment or retribution, which is how the mind usually thinks about yourself or other people. We tend to think about each other in terms of punishment and retribution. But it actually goes much deeper than that. I myself have never spent any significant amount of time studying ancient spiritual traditions, so I don't know the details, the nuances of how they specifically speak about these concepts. I didn't have to study them. I saw it in my own experience. I saw how it works in my own experience. So it's not going to be a very technical talk, but rather we'll go into the essence of things. What I do know is that karma in Sanskrit, from what I remember, means action. And it's considered to be a kind of a sum total of your past actions that define your future path. That's why it's connected to the concepts of fate. So a question arises, if we look at it this way: what actions are good and what actions are bad? What actions make your future better and what actions make your future worse? How does it work exactly? And how do we get to be a person who commits this action or another? Why, in other words, do we commit this action or another? And for these purposes, I'd like to separate the karmic actions, the actions that you commit due to some ignorance, confusion, misunderstanding, or pain, from the mechanism of accumulating the confusion, misunderstanding, or pain, which I like to call conditioning. So karmic actions are a result of conditioning. So let's first talk about the actions themselves. What is a good action? What is a bad action? It's not as simple as do something good. I mean, there are many, many people who do good things, but still their life is misery. There are no people who do bad things whose life isn't misery. It may be very nice on paper, it may be very nice on the surface, but there's no people that do good things, that do bad things, that are happy. In a very short, kind of concise way of expressing it, an action that is beneficial to you is an action that is aligned with your heart. An action that is hurtful to you, that is harmful to you, is an action committed against your heart, is an action committed against yourself. So even if you do a lot of good things, the intent matters. If you do a lot of good things because you were told that this is the right thing to do, or maybe you read about karma and you scared yourself into behaving this way, if you've introduced some sort of a bargain, you see, that okay, a kind of a bargain with God or a bargain with reality, okay, I'm going to do good things, and then I hope that something good will come out of it. Not because your heart tells you to, not because you want to, but because you want something bad, something good in return. That does not eliminate your karma. It's certainly better than doing bad things and hoping to get ahead at the expense of other people. But this alone does not eliminate your karma. So in this life, there are two most important intense forces, and one is fear. The fear of punishment, the fear of disapproval from society, the fear of God, the fear of death, the fear of life, the fear of reality. And another is love, appreciation, enjoyment, pleasure. The things you do out of fear often backfire. Even if they are socially approved. Because the doing itself isn't genuine. It is not sincere. In this doing, in such doing, there's an expectation of a reward. So even if you do kind things with an expectation of a reward, it is not authentic kindness. And the reality is structured in such a way, because it's the reality of minds. The mind creates the reality which you inhabit in the dream state. The reality is structured in such a way that when you do things inauthentically, dishonestly, then you invariably get disappointed. It's just a question of how. So how does it accumulate? How do we actually get into this state of mind? When we are knowingly, unconsciously move in life against our heart and against our best interest. The interesting thing also is it just so happens in the nature of reality that there's usually, with very rare exceptions, what's best for you is also what's best for another person. Because with very rare exceptions, we all do much better when we understand each other and cooperate rather than compete with each other and be selfish towards each other. So that is why when this selfishness is transcended, life flowers. It becomes a joy. It becomes a celebration. It becomes beautiful when the judgments are eliminated and the karma is transcended. So moving against your heart is most of the time moving against others, and moving against others is most of the time moving against yourself. So coming back to the question, how do we get into this state of things? Well, we do it without understanding it. There's always an element of not understanding it. There's also always an element of illusion. There's always an element of self-deceit. So if there were no illusion, if there were no deceit, there would be no question of karma. Why would you ever do anything that will backfire? Why would you ever do anything that moves against your heart? Why would you ever do a suboptimal thing? A bad thing? Something that will hurt you? So it becomes an important question to understand. How does this even come to be? In some spiritual traditions, they talk about past lives. Multiple thousands of death and rebirth, where you accumulate those things. And from my perspective, all of this is nonsense. From my perspective, there are no past lives, even though the experiences of seeing your past life could arise in meditation, in a psychedelic trips, and they can feel as real as it gets. And I've had those too. They were all needed for something to be resolved. They were all needed for something to be understood. For something to be let go of. And the deeper I let go of the karmic tendencies of the mind, the deeper I understood how it all formed. So in my view, we begin accumulating those conditioning pretty much the moment we are born, maybe even in the mother's womb, because we are born into very judgmental and hateful society. We are denied unconditional love from our parents. We are denied unconditional love from greater society. It's a very judgmental, very hierarchical society. We are born into subjugation. That's why the spiritual process is the process of finding a freedom. When you're just a little child that depends entirely on survival, on adults, you don't have a lot of choice. If you're a little child and you're faced with an aggression of someone 10 times bigger than you, then you will grow up to be fearful. You will be scared to show your anger. If you're faced with disapproval or withdrawal of love from your caregivers, every time you cry, boys don't cry, girls don't get angry, this is the right behavior, this is the wrong behavior. Always defer to adults, even when they're wrong. Then the only way to actually survive into this situation is reject yourself, is to forget yourself, is to reject your authenticity. Because it is dangerous to be authentic. It is scary. There is nothing more important in a child's life than a connection with their caregivers. It's a lifeline. A threat of a connection to the caregivers is literally a threat of death to a child. Nature designed us in such a way that in this tender age, we are programmed to absorb all the information that the parents are telling us, that society is telling us. And we are dependent on the survival. Our survival depends on them. And so we try to conform. We repress our authentic selves. We try to be the way the adults in the society expect us to be. We abandon the crying, hurting inner child that continues to exist within us. And the only way to actually do it, practically speaking, is to deny what we feel. So we start denying what we feel, and in this process we start to forget. We start to forget our authentic selves. We start to forget what we actually want. We start to forget what actually interests us. We start to forget to be kind towards ourselves. Because the messages are not about kindness. The messages are about achievement. The messages are about earning something. If you want to make a society of slaves, then you need to tell them that they're unworthy unless they perform. That there's something wrong with them unless they perform. And we start to slowly believe it and form the character that we play a mask that is designed to conform, that is designed to please, that is designed to get ahead. And we look outside and we choose different strategies. Those strategies become our karma. We choose different strategies to exist in this world. We choose different strategies to pretend. We choose different strategies to get what we want, which is never what we truly want. But what was promised to us would relieve us from the suffering. It could be status. And then we try to develop the strategy of being seen as powerful, of learning to dominate other people. We start walking all over them. And that becomes a karma. Because even though they could comply on the surface, deep down they will harbor resentment towards you if you treat people this way. Then we get surprised. Why we get betrayed, for example. Even though we never treat the people who betray us with humanity in the first place. We may take the opposite route and become a people-pleasing individuals. Trying to always be nice. And then we start accumulating resentment ourselves. And we start wondering why, even though we do everything right by the book, how society tells us a good, kind individual must be, our relationships don't last. Why we don't want to continue to be with this person anymore when the resentment grows way too high. We are taught to believe that there is something fundamentally wrong with us, that our happiness, the love, the joy of life needs to be earned. It is not available right here, right now. It is somewhere in the future. You have to earn it. You have to attain it. If we buy into this notion, and almost everybody does, self-loathing is connected to this notion. Self-rejection is connected to this notion. So oftentimes we cope with ways that are even more hurtful to us in the long run. But it gives us a temporary relief from the currents of self-hatred that we find ourselves in. We may turn to drugs, unhealthy relationship with food, alcohol, compulsive shopping, obsession with a career, and we ignore the signs of our body and our psyche telling us that that's too much, that that's actually harmful behavior. So that becomes a karma. And through it all, we start viewing the world in a certain way. We start viewing the people through this lens of our past experiences. If we were mistreated oftentimes, we start expecting other people to mistreat us. We assume the ill will. If we're disingenuous and oftentimes lie to get what we want, we would assume that other people do the same. We will miss a truly good-willing person. We will create conflict out of nowhere. We'll assume nefarious intent towards even the most benign actions. We'll become mistrustful. And that becomes a karma. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in a relationship. If you're a very controlling person, a very insecure, jealous person, then you'll push your partner away by that. You will kind of create the reality that wasn't there by simply viewing the reality in an inaccurate way. The same applies to other relationships. Like, for example, the trust in business relationship even, right? So if you always suspect someone to take advantage of you, you will behave in a way that will make other people suspect that you're the one to take advantage, because you will see suspicion where none is being presented. And people will think, oh, well, if he thinks that way, maybe he's that way, or that they will grow distrustful of you. So you could say that our future is a reflection of a karma. And our karma, our actions, our reflection of our past, of the conditioning that we have not yet dealt with, of the illusions that we have not yet abandoned, of the mind's stubborn tendency to view reality filtered by the past, instead of being fluid, ever-changing. And the ego, the character that we adopt to play, which gets destroyed in the process of spiritual enlightenment, which is why it's so scary. It can feel like death. The ego, the character that we play, is still living in a lot of ways in childhood. That's why in the spiritual path, oftentimes we get to deal with the very, very deep insecurities that we realize were created long, long, long time ago. So the karma is the product of the unresolved past. It is the product of a mind which, because the past is not yet emotionally resolved, it distorts the reality, the present reality, skews the view of the present reality, and as such tends to recreate the present reality as a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And sometimes it can get to quite extreme degree. Like, for example, if you have grown up in an abusive family, then a truly non-abusive partner, a truly respectful partner might actually seem very weird to you, unfamiliar, somewhat scary even. I mean, what do they have in mind? They treat me very strange. Oh, they show me too much kindness. And so if you've accustomed to people who take interest in you to later use it against you, for example, you'll be very suspicious of their sincere, truthful questions. You'll be reluctant. You would not recognize true good willingness. It's very difficult to recognize what you have never been exposed to. And so you might choose, and you will choose, and most people do choose, something that looks familiar, at least something that you can navigate. And that becomes your karma. And many people wonder, why do I jump from one, and they tell themselves, I want something else, but they cannot recognize something else. So they wonder, why do I jump from one abusive relationship to another? Or why do I get involved with one scoundrel after another? Or if you're very insecure about money, because money was always a source of safety for you. You were always scared, made to be scared. About it. And as a result, you kind of grow up very cheap, very kind of tight, right? So you might be wondering, why do I buy junk all the time? Yeah, I buy it and then it's poor quality. But that's because you're only comfortable, for example, buying the cheapest things. So those habits of the mind, they are formed around our insecurities. They are formed around our emotional nuts. Fear, resentment, anger, grief. We try to avoid something. And in trying to avoid something, we oftentimes recreate it. Because what we're truly trying to avoid is how we feel inside. We're faced with those questions of why do certain things repeat in my life, or why I ended up in the same situation. But because our behavior is unconscious, we don't truly understand the self, why we make certain choices, then we don't know, and it feels like fate. It feels like, oh, this is just how I am, or those things are happening to me. In reality, it's not fate. It's the unconscious. That is why the process of spiritual awakening feels so freeing. Because you're suddenly free to do things you did not allow yourself to do before, and enjoy them. We wonder, why I cannot do things that other people enjoy? Like, other people can dance and enjoy themselves, and every time I dance, I become so self-conscious, or like, people don't like me, people don't talk to me. Why is that? Because somewhere deep inside, you don't like yourself. Somewhere deep inside, you have bought into this belief that when you dance, it's stupid, or you're unlikable. And there are tears and grief in unraveling those beliefs, because it's actually very, very sad to think of yourself this way. And that becomes your karma. In my experience in unraveling my own, I would say that most of it, the big bulk of it, something like 80% of it, is accumulated when we're too little, when we're too unconscious to even understand what's going on. When we faced this choice between survival and conformity. Survival and the expectations of our caregivers, how we should behave. But it does not mean that we do not add on to it. Because every action that is against ourselves will later need to be reckoned with. It is quite possible to add on to it in an extreme degree, maybe even overshadowing the initial conditioning of the childhood. For example, if you kill somebody. I myself have not killed anybody. I have never been into a physical fight. I have never hurt anybody. So I can only imagine how much guilt someone would experience. But there is another part of it, which is the desire to hurt yourself. And that I'm familiar with. As I oftentimes say, the direction of the aggression is quite illusory. What's important is the aggression itself. Some people direct it outwards. They commit acts of violence and aggression and hostility towards other human beings. Some people direct it inwards, and they commit acts of violence and hostility towards themselves. Suicide being the pinnacle of it. Suicide is murder. It's just a murder of yourself. Self-harm is another one. And then, of course, some of us use the coping mechanisms which are so profoundly physically damaging that we can categorize it as self-harm. Hard drugs being one of them. Alcoholism, heroin, crack, cocaine. Can all be very damaging for your health. And so when we start seeing what led us to our action, when we start unraveling this bowl of karma with deeper and deeper consciousness, going deeper and deeper into the suppression, going deeper and deeper into our being, into our nature, unraveling the madness of the mind, what we did to ourselves, whether it's self-harm or jumping from one abusive relationship to another, what we did to others, whether it's aggression or violence or domination, manipulation, we'll invariably have to go through the process of forgiveness. So we cry. When we understand that we only abused somebody because we couldn't deal with our anger and they didn't deserve it, we cry. When we understand that we only abused ourselves because we believed that we deserve it, we cry. When we understand that we navigate the world through the lens of fear and hatred and judgments and scarcity, and oftentimes we had been in this labyrinth for decades at this point, we cry. It feels like such a tremendous waste of the beauty, of the enjoyment, of love, of potential. Of what could be, of how we could live. So we grieve. And if you wish, you could also call that karma. You could call the consequences, the emotional consequences of your action, of your actions, your karma. We feel guilt, anger, sadness, disgust even. Because it's also ugly. How human beings treat each other is ugly. How we treat ourselves in our minds is ugly. So it is quite possible to accumulate karma in the adulthood. And in fact, there's a tension. It's a process of, on the one hand, you accumulate karma with your continued actions by being an authentic self. On the other hand, as time goes by and life unravels, you get to learn very painful lessons. And you get to expose yourself again and again to the emotional turmoil that exists in you. That's why Osho said, your whole life moves you towards Buddhahood. The life itself, the unraveling of life, through it continuously violating your expectations, takes you through more and more difficult times. And so this tension between those two processes of a continuing to live as you were and getting painful lessons and difficult emotional experience in course of life defines when the spiritual awakening happens, if it happens at all. Because usually when it happens is when the lesson is so painful that it feels like something has to change, that you cannot live this way anymore. And you start searching for something real. You just cannot play this character anymore. It gets too tiring, too exhausted. That's when oftentimes people have a glimpse. So you could say that most people that were on the spiritual path, after having accumulated with no fault of their own, their initial 80%, as I said before, of karma during the childhood of being conditioned by this society, continue to accumulate it until it becomes unbearable. And this is oftentimes when the awakening happens. That's why so many people say that before awakening, life kind of pushes them into a corner. It feels like there's nowhere left to go, that everything has been tried and nothing worked. Or a somewhat more mild scenario is as people get older and older and older and wiser just with age, as they get more and more exposed to their own emotions and get better and better and more emotionally mature, they kind of go over the hump of starting to shed more karma than accumulate without a major, huge, catastrophic event. And those are the people that many of you have known in your life that appear to get wiser and calmer with age, rather than more bitter and less pleasant. And there are people like that too. But this tension between accumulating karma and shedding karma is the tension between the ego continuing to want to live in delusion because it's afraid of being seen, and it's afraid of its pain of being exposed, and a person getting closer and closer into jumping into the rabbit hole of the spiritual awakening. Congratulations for having jumped. The shedding of karma is always an emotional experience. That's the only way it can be. When you have seen for yourself that you've been lying to yourself about something, that you've only been repeating the same mistake because you were afraid, that you were under the spell of illusion or delusion, it always hurts. When you see that you have hurt somebody undeservedly, it always hurts. There's always some guilt. It is always an emotional process to part with our beliefs. It is our inaccurate beliefs that constitute the totality of karma. And you can say that the ego is the totality of karma. You can say the ego is made of karma. And karma itself, speaking of using this word to mean conditioning, not the actions, are made out of inaccurate beliefs which are supported by the unresolved emotion. So as we go shedding those beliefs, we always go through emotions. And being in the midst of those beliefs, we continue to make mistakes, and we do the karmic actions. Being less understanding, less forgiving, harsh, judgmental towards ourselves, towards each other. So that is why I insist again and again that the emotional work is the most important work on the spiritual journey. And if you challenge your beliefs, if you go inwards, if you start this process of deep introspection, honestly, truthfully, genuinely, it is never pleasant. It's always going to get emotional. And tomorrow we'll talk about awareness. There's a beautiful, pristine awareness underneath all of it. And we'll talk about it too. But you can't shortcut your way there without looking at the human, without looking at the ego, without being honest about your struggles, without being honest about the limitations of your consciousness, without exploring every single nook and cranny of your consciousness, without looking at all the dark corners that you don't want to look at, without acknowledging the darkness, the anger, the rage, the sadness. Awareness loves human in its entirety. Every single aspect of your consciousness is loved. So every single aspect of your consciousness will be explored. And with that continued process, you will keep shedding and shedding, losing and losing your wrong ideas about who you are, about what you are, about reality, about others, about yourself, about how this world works. And then one day you will not be able to turn back any longer. You'll be beyond the point of no return. So that's why I don't focus too much on awareness. I focus on the human. Awareness will find you. So now I'm open for questions. Yes?
So it seems like karma would just stop one day, right? That's waking up.
When this karma stops completely, that's a complete and unsurpassed enlightenment. Practically speaking, karma, just like the ego, exists even in the very sublime state of consciousness, and it's a long process of uncovering more and more of it, and it kind of goes down and down and down and down, and usually right after the collision, right after the awakening, it's most intense, and it could last for many years. And then closer to deep embodiment, it's less and less intense. But there are oftentimes subtler things, like not very painful things, but still subtler things that continue to kind of affect your behavior in less than optimal way. So it's a journey of purifying the mind deeper and deeper and deeper. And then, by the way, there is a question of whether it's possible to accumulate more karma. In my experience, no. Like the karma that you have dealt with, you will not pick up again, at least in lack of serious physical threat. So I think that an adult individual that has dealt with most of their childhood conditioning either cannot be conditioned or can only be conditioned by things like physical violence or torture. So because I have not, and I hope not to be physically violent too, 1984 style, when they were brainwashing him, I cannot tell you which one it is, but I wouldn't be surprised if it wouldn't be possible at all.
You said in the beginning, I think, and forgive me if I'm misquoting you, but you said that an action that is beneficial, or when you're making an action that is beneficial for yourself, this is the way I understand it, that's an action that's not acting against yourself. But you said it much better. I feel like I do this with my job. My sales job. Yeah, it feels like I'm wasting my life and my potential and my heart every time I do this job now, even though I've learned to accept it to a degree. So is the karma basically, say, despair, sadness that I feel over this, a signal, a reflection of what I have not resolved in the past that is also connected to this action that keeps me doing this job? Because the other thing is that there's nothing else that I see to do. If there was something else I see to do, then I would, but of course that's a convenient way to keep the story together. So my question would be is, if you don't see what else to do, and if you've been waiting for a while, and of just learning to accept your current circumstance as is, but you still feel like it's true that you're wasting your life or that you're wasting your potential, do you have any suggestions on how to navigate that, or on what maybe I might be missing, that it keeps happening, that I keep myself in this position?
Why do you keep yourself in this position?
It pays me enough to live and to pay my bills and do the things that I want.
But it feels like a waste of life.
Yes. And because I'm somewhat skilled in it, so it's, as I continue going through this process, it's in a way easier to manage than what I imagine maybe going back to school would be, or getting a certification in something, but also I don't have any glaring interest that's like speaking out to me. It's like, hey, do this. So I stay in this position because I don't know what else to do.
There's an infinity of things you could do.
I know. And I think I also stay in this position because I'm afraid.
That's right. You're afraid. It doesn't mean that you need to jump into something right away, right? It doesn't mean you need to destroy everything and move it into something with complete abandon for whatever income or lifestyle that you wish to preserve. But don't let the lifestyle that you wish to preserve stop you from truly going for your potential. Because that would truly be a waste.
Yes, and that's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of that, exactly.
Yeah. So make small steps. Make steps. Keep looking, keep trying. Put in a plan. Don't miss the opportunities that come your way. Look for opportunities. Don't say no to the opportunities just because you're afraid. Make it an adventure. And it's important to surrender to the feelings of grief and sadness that come with it. Because you're not only grieving for your own waste of life, but you're also grieving for how millions of people in this world, billions, waste their lives by being just this cog in a machine and doing the same thing over and over again. All predicated on this fear of survival and believing that that's the only way it can be, that's the only way I can survive, which is if I just rent myself and do the soulless job over which I have absolutely no interest, myself, which doesn't truly benefit anybody, and just making the money for my owner. And it feels like it's the only way that they can live. It's a tragedy, really. You're not helpless, so the more you allow yourself to feel those emotions, anger may come to, the better the position you will be in to actually take some action. It's okay if it takes time. It's okay if it takes time to grieve. But the more you grieve, the more you will find yourself ready to take action. The more you process the fear of taking action, the more you'll spend time. You actually cannot, if you truly go into the feelings of fear as a bodily expression, they cannot paralyze you forever. Like sooner or later, you'll see that it's actually not as scary, and you're just playing with yourself, and you will become like, okay, what am I doing? I just need to. That's not a very big deal. I just need to do something now.
You mean the fear of
Yeah.
wasting my potential or something
Yeah,
like that?
yeah.
Go into that directly.
Yeah.
You just realize like, oh, it's just the experience
Yeah.
that I'm afraid of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question, Alex. So, Artem, I understand the conditioning part of karma from childhood. I understand it in spades, actually. But what I've noticed is there seems to be two things operating. There's the initial conditioning or the repeated conditioning, and then there's this habituation that I seem to have put myself through, to where it's almost, you do this stuff mindlessly, and then you find yourself asking the question, why do I keep doing this shit? So, for me, once you deal with all the emotional trauma of the conditioning, you still have the habituation that is operative, and it's really hard to decondition yourself from that.
I would challenge this a little bit, because when you say there's a certain contradiction when you say, and it's hard to decondition yourself from that, because the only reason it could be hard, because we're not talking about physical hardship, we're not talking about laying bricks. The only reason it would be hard is because there's still some emotional processing, right? I agree with you that there's a difference between kind of the initial, we can delineate that if we want to, the initial kind of conditioning and the habituation. We can delineate it. There's, like, strictly speaking, one flows into the other, but we can delineate. What I would challenge you on is that the idea that breaking those habits have nothing to do with emotional processing. So it's when you are already conscious enough that you start seeing the automatic behavior and you don't understand why you do this, and you kind of ask yourself why, and you feel that it's not serving you, it's actually a very good time to stop doing this, to actually reverse the habit in a conscious effort to do something else. Yes, purely theoretically, if you go into deeper and deeper meditations, or especially if you take psychedelics, you will get also to the habit of those conditions, of those behaviors, and they will change more or less naturally, because there is some emotional suppression attached to it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be hard to change. Otherwise, it would be just, okay, now I do this thing, tomorrow I do another thing. There would be no rumination in the mind about why I'm doing this. There would be no understanding or exposure that they automatic. So everything automatic has to do with, everything unconscious has to do with unprocessed emotions. So strictly speaking, you could get to the remaining pain in the mind that makes those behaviors difficult to change. You're looking for some safety in those behaviors, so it's sort of an expression of some other, let's say, defilement, some other pain in the mind. But when you get conscious of it, deliberately changing those behaviors works just as well, oftentimes. And what you will notice is that it may even work better. So what you will notice is that when you start changing those behaviors, the underlying emotional issues that those behaviors were in connection with will get exposed. That's why you say they are hard to change. Because you will notice some yearning, right? So you change this behavior. Okay, we won't do it. We'll do it differently, and then you'll notice the mind yearnings, the mind's objections, the mind's tendency to go into that behavior, and behind that, you will see the true reason of why this behavior felt appropriate before. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So it's not, so just to everyone also, to everyone who's listening, yes, all the right habits arise spontaneously in the liberating mind. Yes, you can say that the liberation is all about spiritual practice, honesty, meditation, lots of method. But the true embodiment also happens in life, and you absolutely can approach it from the perspective of life, right? You can approach it from the perspective of practice, but you can also approach it from the perspective of life. For example, if you're struggling with some addictions, and you already know, you can roughly define addiction as a behavior which you know is hurting you, but it's difficult to stop. Deliberately stopping addiction will invariably make conscious the yearnings, the emotions that you were trying to escape from, that underpin this addiction. You can even say that the ego is an addiction to approval from others, and meditation as a solitary activity, as a completely solitary activity, is the way to stop this addiction. And then in meditation, you start seeing all of the arguments and discontents and yearnings and despair to realize on the way of realizing your true deep aloneness. So it's all very kind of, there's a lot of parallels between all of these processes. So don't think that changing actions, changing patterns, acting differently in life cannot be spiritually productive. It can be, absolutely. So change those patterns consciously. See what comes up. Don't do this thing that you feel is useless to you any longer. Notice yourself doing it. I mean, if you notice, right? So with time, you'll start noticing more and more. If it doesn't serve you anymore, just don't do it.
The one thing that seems to keep coming back to me in this is how important it is to just be aware of what you're doing.
Yes. Yes. And also the question of why can be a tremendously important question. Why am I doing this?
But until you're aware, you can't ask that question.
Yeah, or you can, but the mind will give you some bullshit answer and you'll be satisfied with it. Right? Why am I behaving this way or another? Why do I want to do this in my relationship, in my life? What are the truly important things to me?